What would you do if the seat you paid for, the seat you earned, was taken from you? Not because of a mistake, but because of the color of your skin. Would you fight? Would you walk away? Or would you find a way to turn that single moment of humiliation into a movement that changed an entire industry? This is the story of Elias Carter, a black CEO, a man of quiet strength and unshakable dignity who boarded Orion Airways Flight 2278 expecting only a few hours of peace and work. Instead, he was forced to confront raw discrimination at 30,000 feet. What followed was a battle that began with one stolen seat and ended with the collapse of powerful families, the rebirth of an airline, and a transformation that no one in aviation saw coming. How did Elias respond when the world was watching? How did he take pain and turn it into power, not only for himself, but for countless others? And what did it cost him to stand for justice when silence would have been easier? Before we dive into this powerful journey, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to hit like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel because this is one story you don't want to miss. The soft hum of boarding announcements echoed through Gate C-19 of Atlanta International Airport. Elias Carter stood by the window, watching the Orion Airways jet glisten under the late afternoon sun. His reflection in the glass showed a man composed, though weariness shadowed his eyes. 42 years old, CEO of Novalink Technologies, he had just closed a $600 million international contract that would reshape logistics infrastructure across 3 continents. Success, on paper, was his closest companion. Yet, at that moment, what he wanted most was silence. 4 hours of peace from Atlanta to San Francisco, and the window seat he had carefully chosen. When his boarding group was called, Elias stepped onto the jet bridge with the steady gait of someone used to moving through worlds that once tried to shut him out. His tailored navy suit carried no excess flash, but subtle distinction. A silver watch, understated but elegant, peeked from under his cuff. He carried a leather portfolio in one hand and a tablet in the other. As he entered the first-class cabin, the flight attendant stationed at the door smiled warmly. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Carter," she said. Her badge read Naomi Brooks. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with alert eyes that softened when they recognized him. Congratulations on the Horizon acquisition. It was all over the news this morning. Elias allowed himself a brief smile. "Thank you, Naomi. It's been a week." Sliding into seat 2A, he exhaled. The seat, tucked by the window with no one directly in front due to the staggered cabin layout, was perfect. Privacy, quiet, space to work. Elias placed his jacket carefully in the overhead bin, then pulled out his tablet, opening a draft of the board presentation waiting for him on Monday. Numbers, charts, and talking points filled the screen. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, his temples ached with the dull reminder of nights spent negotiating, persuading, proving, always proving. As passengers filed in, Elias tuned into the rhythm of boarding, the rustle of bags, the click of heels against the aisle floor, the muted chatter of strangers becoming neighbors. He had learned over years of flying that first-class cabins often carried their own theater of entitlement where money, status, or imagined prestige collided. He had no interest in the performance tonight. And then, the performance walked in. Victoria Langford. Her presence announced itself before her voice did. The flash of designer luggage, 2 oversized carry-ons that blatantly ignored the one-bag rule, was the first cue. The second was the way she gestured to the flight attendant without so much as a word of courtesy. "These should go in the closet," she declared, as if the bins above were unsuitable for her possessions. Naomi kept her professional tone. "Of course, ma'am, but I'll need to confirm available space." Victoria tilted her head back, sunglasses perched in her highlighted hair, diamonds glinting at her neck and wrists. 51 years old, wrapped in wealth like armor. She radiated the confidence of someone who had never been told no. She scanned the first-class cabin, her eyes moving with slow precision until they stopped on Elias. Her lips curved into the faintest smirk, as if the mere sight of him occupying the front row disrupted her order of things. "They really are letting anyone in here these days," she muttered to the man behind her, not quite under her breath. "Loud enough?" Elias inhaled slowly through his nose. His eyes stayed on his tablet, fingers steady against the glass screen, though his chest tightened. Selective deafness. It had been his shield since his early career, but shields grow heavy with time. Victoria stopped beside his row, glanced at her boarding pass, then, ignoring the clearly marked 2C, placed her designer purse on the floor. Without hesitation, she lowered herself into 2A, his seat, his carefully chosen refuge. She adjusted, leaned back, and settled in as though nothing were amiss. Elias moved his tablet quickly to avoid her elbow. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said politely, his voice calm. "I believe you're in my seat." Victoria's eyes slid to him. Cool, dismissive. "I'm quite aware of what seat this is," she said slowly. "Then you might have noticed it isn't the seat on your boarding pass," Elias replied, steady as stone. He lifted his pass, showing the clear print 2A. "This is my assigned seat." Her gaze flicked to the pass, then back to her phone. "I always sit by the window," she said. "I'm sure you wouldn't mind taking the aisle." Or perhaps her eyes darted toward economy, something more suitable back there. The words carried a weight centuries old, a toxic insinuation wrapped in courtesy's shadow. Around them, passengers shifted in their seats, unease tightened in the air, but no one spoke. Elias drew in another breath. He had sat at countless tables where he was the only black man, had endured questions designed to remind him of his difference, had fought to prove his worth in rooms stacked against him. Yet here, again, in a seat he had paid for, his dignity was being negotiated like an optional upgrade. "Ma'am," he said, measured but firm, "I booked this seat deliberately. Your assigned seat is 2C. I ask that you move so we may both enjoy our flight." Victoria turned, raising her voice just enough for nearby ears. "Are you telling me where I can and cannot sit?" That's extremely aggressive. The switch was instant. Elias recognized it, the gambit of flipping roles, painting him as the aggressor. The performance sharpened. Excuse me," she called to Naomi. "I need assistance immediately. This man is harassing me." Naomi arrived, professionalism intact, though her eyes flickered with concern. "How can I help you?" "Ma'am, this man is threatening me about seating arrangements," Victoria declared, her voice trembling with mock fear. Elias said nothing for a moment. He looked at Naomi, then calmly offered his boarding pass. "This is my seat." Naomi examined it, nodded. "Yes, sir. 2A is assigned to you." She turned to Victoria. "May I see your boarding pass?" Ma'am Victoria sighed as though inconvenienced. Reluctantly, she handed it over, The pass clearly read 2C, Mrs. Langford, Naomi said, her voice still diplomatic. Your seat is 2C. Company policy requires passengers to sit in their assigned seats. Victoria's lips tightened. This is ridiculous. Do you know who my husband is, Edward Langford, chairman of Orion Airways? I always sit by the window. Elias felt the atmosphere shift. Phones began lifting, discreet but deliberate. A man 2 rows behind angled his camera with practiced subtlety. The story was already writing itself in pixels. Elias straightened his shoulders, the weight of history pressing down, but his voice calm as ever. I'm not asking for special treatment, he said, only that the rules apply equally to everyone. Victoria's eyes narrowed, her tone sharpened to a blade. We all know how you people get into these positions. The cabin froze. The words landed heavy, undeniable. Elias's chest constricted, the familiar ache of being reduced, erased, humiliated even in the height of accomplishment. He closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself. His grandmother's words returned. Dignity is not what others grant you. It's what you refuse to surrender. The intercom crackled. Captain Richard Hale to the first-class cabin. Please. The stage was set. The clash was no longer between 2 passengers. It was becoming a trial at 30,000 feet, with witnesses, recordings, and consequences none of them could yet imagine. Captain Richard Hale emerged from the cockpit with the steady gait of a man who had logged nearly 3 decades in the skies. His silver hair and sharp blue eyes carried authority that usually ended disputes before they began. But today, the tension in the air felt heavier than turbulence. He stopped at the first-class cabin, surveying the scene. Victoria Langford sat rigidly in 2A, her chin tilted high as though daring anyone to challenge her. Elias Carter remained standing, calm yet unyielding, boarding pass in hand. Naomi Brooks stood between them, her professional smile brittle. What seems to be the problem here? Hale asked. Before Naomi could respond, Victoria leaned forward. Captain, thank goodness you're here. This man is harassing me about seating. I don't feel safe with his aggression. Elias's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. Captain, this is my assigned seat. Mrs. Langford has taken it, and I've asked politely for her to move. Hale took both boarding passes, examining them with a frown. Mrs. Langford, your seat is 2C, the aisle. Victoria's response was immediate, her voice dripping with indignation. My husband is the chairman of this airline. I always sit by the window. Surely you can make an exception. You wouldn't want this to turn into a bigger issue than it needs to be. Elias felt the words like static electricity against his skin. A bigger issue? That was the unspoken threat. His dignity, once again, treated as a matter of convenience. Around them, the other passengers shifted, some avoiding eye contact, others pretending to scroll on their phones, though the glowing red record icons betrayed them. Ma'am, Hale began carefully. For safety and fairness, passengers must sit in their assigned seats. Victoria's eyes flared. She pulled out her phone, dialing with quick taps. Edward, it's me, she said loudly. They're refusing to honor my seat preference. Yes, I told them who I am. Yes, I told them who you are. She paused, listening, then raised her voice even more. They're siding with some man who's making me uncomfortable. Handle this. The word uncomfortable hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Elias had heard it before, in offices where his calm disagreement was painted as hostility, in negotiations where his firmness became aggression. His mind raced, weighing options. He could continue pressing, risk being labeled the angry black man in first class, or he could step aside and taste the bitter residue of surrender. Captain Hale turned toward Elias, his face pinched with discomfort. "Sir, I understand your frustration, and you're in the right, but, for the sake of departure, would you consider taking another seat? We have a spare in 1B. It was a request cloaked in apology, but it was also a command born of convenience. Hale wanted peace, not justice." Elias inhaled deeply, the memory of his grandmother's voice echoing in his mind, "Choose your battles, but never surrender your dignity." His chest burned with the unfairness of it all. Here he was, a man who had built a multi-billion-dollar company from nothing, yet still being told that his comfort, his rights, were less important than someone else's entitlement. Elias nodded once. "Fine, I'll move." The capitulation tasted like ash. He gathered his belongings slowly, each motion deliberate, while Victoria reclined smugly into the window seat as if she had won a prize. Her smile was triumphant, but empty. Elias caught the glance of Naomi, who looked away quickly, guilt shadowing her expression. As Elias settled into 1B, a deep voice spoke beside him. That was wrong. Everyone saw it. Elias turned. The speaker was Andre Miller, a 35-year-old venture capitalist he recognized from industry events. Sharp suit, confident posture, but eyes that burned with quiet indignation. "Andre Miller," he said, extending his hand. "Miller Equity Partners." Elias shook it firmly. "Elias Carter, Novalink Technologies. I was at your keynote in Detroit last year," Andre said. "You spoke about AI ethics, best talk of the conference, and for what it's worth, I know Edward Langford. He's exactly the kind of man whose wife would pull something like that." Elias gave a small nod, though the weight in his chest didn't lighten. He turned back to his tablet, but the screen blurred. His mind replayed the incident in jagged fragments, Victoria's words, Hale's compromise, the passengers recording silently rather than intervening. Even at the pinnacle of his career, he could still be reduced to a stereotype in a matter of minutes. Half an hour into the flight, the seatbelt sign turned off. Naomi passed through the cabin, her smile strained. When she reached Victoria, she paused. "Would you like something to drink, ma'am? My champagne isn't cold enough," Victoria snapped, waving her glass. "Do you people not understand the simple instructions?" Naomi's face didn't flinch, though Elias could see the flicker in her eyes. She kept her composure. "I'll be happy to bring you another glass." "Ma'am, don't bother," Victoria said sharply. "I'll be speaking with your supervisor." Elias stood then, his tall frame commanding quiet attention. "Excuse me, Naomi," he said, his tone warm. "When you have a moment, could I get sparkling water?" "Of course, sir," Naomi said, her gratitude shining in her eyes. "And for the record," Elias added, "your professionalism is exemplary." Naomi's lips pressed into the faintest smile. She moved on, and Elias returned to his seat. Andre leaned closer. That was a classy way to handle it. But Elias's chest still churned. He thought of the countless times he had been mistaken for an assistant instead of a CEO, asked for identification when his white colleagues walked through without question, had his ideas ignored until repeated by someone else. His success had not insulated him from prejudice. It had only given him more to lose when prejudice came knocking. By the time the plane began its descent, murmurs rippled through the cabin. Several passengers had footage already circulating online. Andre turned his phone screen toward Elias. A live stream caption read, "Racist woman takes black CEO's seat." The comments scrolled quickly, disbelief and outrage spreading faster than turbulence. "This is going viral," Andre said quietly, "and it's just the beginning." Elias's phone buzzed in his pocket, notifications flooding. He silenced it without looking. For now, he stared out the window, the San Francisco skyline glittering in the distance. His humiliation burned hot, but beneath it smoldered something else, a resolve that would not cool. As the wheels touched down, Elias knew one truth with absolute clarity. This was not just about a seat. It was about something much larger, something that had been festering in silence, and maybe, just maybe, this time he wouldn't let it pass. The hum of San Francisco's skyline buzzed faintly through the glass walls of Elias Carter's corner office. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed a city alive with ambition, but his focus was on the screen glowing before him. The video from Flight 2278 had passed 1 million views overnight. By morning, it had tripled. Clips showed Victoria Langford sliding into seat 2A, her voice sharp as she declared, "We all know how you people get into these positions." That single line had been replayed, dissected, and amplified across every platform. Headlines multiplied, CEO forced to give up seat in first-class clash, entitled Passenger Sparks, Outrage at 30,000 Feet, Racism in the Skies. Elias rubbed his temples. He had built Novalink into a billion-dollar enterprise by anticipating problems before they erupted. But this wasn't a supply chain glitch or an AI system failure. This was his life. Broadcast worldwide, stripped of context, captured in shaky phone cameras and endless commentary. A knock at his door pulled him from the screen. Sophia Reed entered, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek bun, a folder tucked beneath her arm. 38 years old, Harvard Law graduate. She had left a prestigious firm 2 years earlier to join Novalink as chief legal counsel. She thrived in crises, but today her eyes carried both caution and determination. "Elias," she said, setting the folder on his desk, "the video has hit 6 million views. Hashtags are trending worldwide. Do you seat 2A? Orion Airways racism. Even justice for Elias. I've already fielded calls from CNN, The Times, and CNBC. They all want your side of the story." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling. "And what happens if I give it? Do I become the angry CEO railing against injustice, or do I become the token example of resilience, expected to smile politely and move on?" Sophia sat across from him, her voice firm. "You don't owe the world politeness. Elias, what happened to you wasn't an isolated incident. It was systemic. And it isn't just about you. I've started digging into Orion Airways' record, 24 discrimination complaints in the past 3 years, most settled quietly with non-disclosure agreements. What you experienced is part of a pattern." Elias stared at the folder, his fingers brushing its edge but not opening it. His chest ached with a familiar conflict. He wanted to act, to demand accountability. But another voice whispered in his mind, the voice of pragmatism. He had a company to run, employees who depended on him, shareholders who might not understand his diversion of focus. Was this his battle to fight? Before he could respond, his phone buzzed, a message from Andre Miller. "Meet me. I have information you'll want to see. within an hour. Andre was in the office, his suit jacket draped over a chair, his laptop open on the conference table. The man radiated energy, his movements quick, his words sharper still. "As I told you on the plane," Andre began, pulling up charts. "I know Edward Langford. My firm considered investing in Orion Airways last year before we pulled out. And I'll tell you why. They're drowning. Their last quarterly report painted a rosy picture, but the numbers don't hold. They're over-leveraged, hiding financial mismanagement and suppressing complaints that would expose their culture. Discrimination isn't their only problem. It's just the one that finally hit daylight." Sophia leaned in, studying the graphs. "If this is true, Orion isn't just vulnerable morally, they're vulnerable structurally." Elias rubbed his chin. The idea felt dangerous, yet strangely compelling. He hadn't chosen this fight, but perhaps the fight had chosen him. The question was whether to risk stepping into the fire. Andre's eyes locked on his. "The video has already shaken their brand. Bookings are down. Stock dropped 4% today. If you push publicly, strategically, you could force systemic change. Or, if you want more than change, you could leverage this into control." The words settled heavy in the room. Control. Elias hadn't thought of it. He had never wanted to own an airline, let alone one tainted with scandal. But his mind drifted to the young flight attendant, Naomi Brooks, who had held her composure as Victoria berated her. To the countless stories Sophia's folder no doubt contained. To his own humiliation in that narrow aisle, being asked to yield so everyone else could be comfortable. "Is that what I want?" Elias asked quietly. "To own an airline? Or do I want something bigger? Justice, reform, dignity?" Andre shrugged. "Sometimes the only way to create real reform is to own the ground you're trying to fix." Silence filled the space. Elias stood, walking to the window. The city sprawled beneath him, glittering with possibility and contradiction. He thought of his grandmother's voice once again. "Dignity is not what they give you, Eli. It's what you refuse to let them take away." Sophia broke the silence. "The question isn't just what you want, it's what you're willing to risk. A lawsuit could take years, drain focus, and result in a settlement that changes nothing, but ownership influence that could rewrite the industry." Elias turned back, resolve hardening in his chest. Then maybe it's time the industry is rewritten. The three of them sat, the outline of a plan beginning to take shape. Sophia would continue gathering evidence of Orion's discriminatory culture. Andre would discreetly line up potential investors who might back Elias if he chose to acquire shares. Elias himself would reach out to employees people like Naomi, who could speak to the pattern from inside. But even as the pieces aligned, Elias wrestled with the storm inside him. Was he doing this out of righteous anger or a need for vindication? Could he separate personal humiliation from systemic injustice? And would people believe in his cause or accuse him of exploiting the moment for power that night? Long after Sophia and Andre left, Elias remained in his office. The city lights shimmered outside, but his mind was far away, replaying the moment on the plane when Captain Hale had asked him to move. That was the moment it crystallized. Not Victoria's entitlement, not even her words, but the captain's quiet request to sacrifice his dignity for everyone else's convenience. It was a request he had complied with his whole life, in boardrooms, in negotiations, in moments, big and small, and he was tired. He opened Sophia's folder at last, The pages detailed story after story, employees who had been silenced, passengers who had been ignored, crew members pressured to appease the wealthy and connected, a pattern impossible to deny. Elias closed the folder, his decision clear. He would not let this be another story buried under headlines that fade. He would not allow the system to swallow dignity as a cost of doing business. If it meant war with Orion Airways, then war it would be. The spark of resolve had ignited, and sparks, when fanned, become flames. Morning sunlight spilled through the Novalink boardroom, gleaming off polished mahogany. Elias Carter sat at the head of the long table, his leadership team waiting for direction. They were used to decisive strategies, clear plans, and calm confidence. But today, they watched their CEO with unspoken concern. The video had not slowed. 10 million views and climbing. News anchors debated it on prime time. Orion Airways stock slipped another 5% overnight. Elias cleared his throat, folding his hands. I know what you've all seen. I know what's being said, and I need to hear from you honestly. Does this compromise us? His CFO shifted uncomfortably. The public sympathizes with you. Elias, most coverage frames you as the victim, not the aggressor. If anything, it enhances your credibility as someone who stands for dignity. But the distraction is real. Investors are asking if this will affect our focus. Elias nodded slowly. He had anticipated as much. Still, the unease in the room pressed against his chest. He was responsible for these people, their families, the company they had built together. Could he risk dragging Novalink into a war with Orion before the meeting could continue? His assistant entered, placing a phone on the table. "Call from Charles Donovan," she said, voice tense. The name silenced the room. Donovan, CEO of Orion Airways. Elias gestured for the line. "Charles," Elias said evenly, his voice carrying no warmth. "Elias." Donovan's voice was smooth, practiced, the cadence of a man accustomed to control. "I wanted to reach out personally. I regret what happened on Flight 2278. These things can spiral out of hand. But let's be reasonable. Neither of us wants this to escalate further." Elias's jaw tightened. "Escalate, Charles. One of your most high-profile passengers humiliated me on your aircraft, on camera, using language that is indefensible, and your crew pressured me to move, despite policy and common sense. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's systemic." Donovan chuckled softly. "Systemic is a strong word. Look, these situations are delicate. What if we offer you a public apology, a generous compensation package, and perhaps a corporate partnership to show goodwill? We'll issue a statement, emphasize that Orion values diversity, and move on." Elias leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "So you want me to trade dignity for a payout and a press release? Let's not frame it like that." Donovan replied quickly. "Think of it as optics management, a win-win. We both have reputations to protect." Elias let the silence linger, his heart pounding with quiet fury. His entire life had been filled with offers to compromise, to accept half measures, to settle for symbolic gestures instead of structural change. He would not do it again. "No. Charles," he said finally, "this isn't optics. This is about accountability, and I'm not for sale." The line went quiet. Then Donovan sighed. "Be careful. Elias, these fights can get messy." The call ended. The boardroom sat in stunned silence. One executive whispered, "What now?" Elias stood, his expression unshaken. "Now, we prepare." That afternoon, the news cycle shifted again. Victoria Langford appeared on a morning show, dressed in pearls and pastel silk, her tone dripping with condescension. "I was simply trying to enjoy my flight," she said, pressing a hand to her chest. "I felt uncomfortable with Mr. Carter's aggressiveness. The media is twisting this into something it wasn't. My family has always supported fairness. My husband is the chairman of Orion. For goodness sake, why would we tolerate discrimination?" The interviewer leaned in. "But, Mrs. Langford, the video shows you taking his seat, and your comment about you people is being widely criticized." Victoria's smile faltered briefly, then returned. "Practiced? Words can be misinterpreted. I was referring to executives who use their money to bully staff, not race. This entire narrative is manufactured to damage my husband's company." The clip went viral again, sparking outrage. Hashtags multiplied. Victoria's lie. Orion cover-up. Watching from his office, Elias felt a deep, simmering heat inside. He thought of Naomi Brooks, the flight attendant whose eyes had carried silent apology. He thought of the passengers who had recorded, who had known it was wrong but said nothing. And he thought of Charles Donovan's voice, smooth with dismissal, treating dignity as something negotiable. That evening, Elias met with Sophia Reed and Andre Miller once more. "They won't back down," Sophia said, slapping a stack of documents on the table. "Donovan wants this buried. Victoria is doubling down. If we don't escalate, they'll spin this until you look like the problem." Andre leaned forward. "And here's the kicker. Orion has been lobbying against a new federal regulation that would require airlines to disclose all discrimination complaints. They're terrified of exposure. If this blows open, it's not just about you. It's about every silenced voice in their system." Elias walked slowly to the window, his reflection merging with the city lights. The burden pressed heavy, but within it was a rising certainty. His humiliation on that flight had not been an accident. It was a symptom of something larger, something rotten at the core of Orion's culture. And maybe, just maybe, he was the one positioned to tear it out. He turned back to them. "Then we escalate." The next morning, headlines carried Elias's first public statement. He did not rage or lash out. Instead, his words were calm, precise, impossible to misinterpret. "What happened to me on Flight 2278 was not an isolated incident. It was a reflection of systemic practices that devalue dignity. This is not just about one passenger or one seat. It is about an airline's responsibility to ensure fairness and respect for every traveler. I will not accept symbolic gestures. I demand transparency, accountability, and reform." The statement sent shockwaves. Orion Airways stock plummeted another 7%. Employees whispered in break rooms. Naomi Brooks, scrolling on her phone during a layover, felt tears prick her eyes. For the first time, someone with power was speaking out not just for himself, but for all of them. In the Langford household. Edward slammed the newspaper against the table. "He thinks he can come after us. He has no idea who he's dealing with." Victoria sipped her wine, her lips curled. "Then show him, Edward. Show him what happens when people forget their place." But in Elias's heart, the fire only grew for too long. People had been told to remember their place. It was time to rewrite the map. The first sign of Orion's counterattack came on a Monday morning when Elias Carter opened the financial pages. A headline screamed across the top, questions raised about Novalink CEO's conduct in flight incident. The article cited anonymous sources claiming Elias had been confrontational, difficult, and intimidating toward staff. It painted him as volatile, entitled, and hungry for attention. Sophia Reed burst into his office minutes later, tossing the paper on his desk. Her voice cut through the quiet. Anonymous sources. This is a smear. They're trying to discredit you before this gains more traction. Elias leaned back in his chair, exhaustion pulling at his eyes. I expected pushback. I just didn't expect it to come this fast. Sophia's tone sharpened. They're moving aggressively. Donovan and the Langfords are desperate. They know if your narrative sticks, their empire crumbles. But this is dangerous. Elias, if they tarnish your name, you lose credibility. And without credibility, there's no reform. Andre Miller arrived not long after, his phone buzzing with notifications. They're flooding the media with planted stories. He said, I've seen it before. They'll try to bury you under noise. But here's the thing. They're sloppy. Too many of these sources are tied to Orion PR firms. We can trace it. We can expose the manipulation. Elias rubbed his temples. A part of him wanted to retreat, to return to the quiet of building Novalink, to let this storm pass. But another part, deeper and more resolute, knew retreat was impossible. He had been humiliated in public. Now the fight itself was public, and the eyes of millions were watching. That evening, Elias sat in his home library, the fire crackling in the hearth. A photograph of his grandmother rested on the mantel, her stern eyes forever reminding him of lessons carved from struggle. He whispered aloud, as if she could hear, I don't know if I'm fighting for justice or for my pride. Maybe both, but I know I can't let them define me. The next day, Naomi Brooks sat in the Orion crew lounge, scrolling through her phone. The company had circulated an internal memo instructing employees not to comment publicly on the incident. The message was clear silence or risk termination. Her fellow flight attendant leaned over. Naomi, you were on that flight. Right? Naomi nodded cautiously. What really happened, Naomi hesitated. She remembered Victoria's words, the look in Elias's eyes, the unfairness of it all. But she also remembered her bills, her rent, her younger brother's tuition that her paycheck helped cover. Speaking out could cost her everything. Later, as she sat alone, she typed a message, deleted it, typed again, Mr. Carter, I was there. I saw it all. If you need my statement, I'm willing to help. Her finger hovered over the send button. Then fear overtook her and she closed the screen. Meanwhile, Elias and Sophia prepared their counteroffensive. She compiled evidence of Orion's history of discrimination, internal complaints, legal filings, testimonies buried under non-disclosure agreements. Andre worked the investor circuit, quietly aligning those dissatisfied with Orion's management. But the smear campaign grew louder. Talk shows replayed clips of Victoria insisting she was misinterpreted. Opinion columns suggested Elias was exploiting the incident for personal gain. Anonymous accounts on social media flooded comment sections with vitriol, questioning his integrity. Elias attended a gala one evening, a commitment he couldn't avoid. The room buzzed with donors, executives, and politicians. Conversations quieted as he entered, eyes following him with curiosity and judgment. A man approached with a glass of champagne. Tough week, Carter. Maybe best to let this go. Hey, no need to make enemies of the Langfords. Elias smiled politely, but his stomach turned. He excused himself, stepping outside onto the terrace where the city lights sprawled. The air was cool, and he let it fill his lungs. His mind wrestled with doubt. Was he endangering Novalink, his employees, his future? Would history remember him as a reformer or as a man who let pride consume him? His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Mr. Carter, this is Naomi Brooks. I'm ready to tell the truth." He exhaled, relief and gratitude mixing with resolve. Here was a witness, an insider, someone who could break Orion's wall of silence. The following morning, Sophia arranged a private meeting. Naomi arrived nervous but determined. Her uniform exchanged for a simple cardigan and jeans. She spoke softly but firmly. "I can't stay silent anymore. What happened on that plane was wrong, and it wasn't the first time. Passengers like Mrs. Langford get special treatment constantly. Complaints are ignored. Crew are told to keep the wealthy comfortable, no matter what. I'll testify if I have to." Elias felt a swell of admiration. "You understand what this means, Naomi? They'll come after you." She nodded. "I know, but dignity isn't worth much if you let fear bury it." Sophia smiled faintly. "You're braver than most of the executives I've dealt with. With Naomi's account, the case against Orion gained new strength, but with strength came new threats. That week, Elias's car was followed twice. Anonymous emails arrived, warning him to back down. A note appeared at his office, crude words scrawled in anger. "Stay in your lane." Sophia insisted on increased security. Andre pushed harder for alliances with shareholders. The battle lines were drawing sharper. Through it all, Elias wrestled with the inner war. Nights he couldn't sleep. He replayed the confrontation on the plane. Part of him wondered if stepping aside quietly would have been easier. But then he remembered Naomi's courage, Andre's conviction, Sophia's relentless fight. He remembered the millions watching, hoping someone would refuse to bow. One evening, as the city outside his office twinkled under nightfall, Elias spoke aloud again, this time with certainty. "I didn't choose this fight, but I won't run from it. If they want war, they'll get it. But it won't be fought with their weapons. It will be fought with truth." The smear campaign raged on, but for the first time Elias felt the tide beginning to turn. Not because he had all the answers, but because he was no longer alone. Naomi had chosen dignity over fear. Andre had chosen strategy over silence. Sophia had chosen justice over compromise, and together, they were building something larger than defense. They were building the foundation of an uprising that could shake the skies. The conference room lights glowed softly as Elias Carter stood before the glass wall, staring out at the San Francisco skyline. He had spent years watching this city rise and fall through cycles of wealth and crisis. Tonight, the view mirrored his thoughts. Orion Airways was faltering under the weight of scandal, yet still towering with influence. If he was going to change them, he couldn't do it alone. Andre Miller leaned back in his chair, feet tapping with restless energy. "The numbers are shifting. Elias, Orion's stock has dropped 12% since your statement. Shareholders are restless. Some want to cut their losses. Others want new leadership. This is the moment to strike, before Donovan stabilizes the narrative." Sophia Reed flipped through her notes with precision. "We have Naomi's testimony documented. She's willing to go public when the time is right. But timing is everything. If we push too early, Orion will bury her under character attacks. If we wait too long, they'll regain their footing. We need a coordinated plan." Elias turned back to them, his voice steady. What would that look like? Andre's eyes lit up. "We build a coalition. Investors, employees, even passengers who've been wronged. We create undeniable momentum. By the time Orion realizes what's happening, we'll hold enough influence to demand reform or force their hand at the board level." Sophia added, "And we must control the narrative. Every move, every word, has to reinforce that this isn't about one man's grievance. It's about systemic change. We can't allow them to paint you as vindictive." Elias nodded, though the weight pressed heavy on his chest. He thought of the faces of his employees at Nova Link, the trust they placed in him. He thought of the passengers whose silent recordings had turned into a viral storm, and he thought of his grandmother, who had endured indignities far worse than a stolen seat, but never once let her spirit bend. That night, Elias hosted a discreet dinner at a private club downtown. The guests included two major Orion shareholders known for their dissatisfaction with the Langfords' leadership. Over wine and seared salmon, they spoke in guarded tones. "We've tolerated Edward Langford's arrogance for years," one investor admitted, "but this scandal is different. The public outrage is real. Our portfolios are bleeding. If you have a plan." "Carter, we're listening." Elias leaned forward, choosing his words carefully. "This isn't about me. It's about whether Orion represents the values the public demands. You've seen the backlash. People will not tolerate discrimination masked by privilege anymore. If Orion doesn't reform, it won't survive. I don't want to destroy the company. I want to save it, but it needs new leadership to do that." The investors exchanged glances. Finally, one nodded slowly. "You'll have my support if you can gather more." It wasn't a promise of victory, but it was a foothold. Meanwhile, Naomi Brooks faced her own crossroads. She returned from a 3-day route to find a notice in her mailbox she was being transferred to a less desirable line, a punishment disguised as routine reassignment. She sat in her small apartment, tears stinging her eyes. The company was pushing back, trying to silence her before she even spoke. She picked up her phone and called Elias. Her voice trembled. "They're retaliating already, but I'm not backing down. If I lose this job, I'll find another. What matters is that someone finally tells the truth." Elias felt a surge of admiration. "Naomi, you're braver than you realize. You're not alone in this. I'll make sure you're protected." The next week, Sophia arranged for Naomi to meet with journalists under conditions of confidentiality. They recorded her account, capturing every detail of what she witnessed on Flight 2278. The footage wasn't released yet, but it was ready, like a loaded weapon waiting for the right moment. As days passed, the coalition grew. Andre connected Elias with advocacy groups that had long fought against discrimination in travel. They offered data, stories, and public support. Sophia secured quiet commitments from more employees willing to testify anonymously. Elias's nights were restless. Sleep evaded him as questions gnawed at his mind. Was he fighting for justice, or had vengeance crept into his heart? Was he risking too much, dragging Novalink into a war that could consume them both? He sat awake at 2 a.m, staring at the city lights, whispering into the darkness. Am I doing this for them or for me? But each morning brought clarity. Messages flooded his inbox from strangers. A father who had been humiliated when his family was downgraded without cause. A young woman of color denied boarding despite a valid ticket. A flight attendant forced to smile through abuse because her supervisor told her the customer was always right. Elias read them all, and slowly, his inner doubts gave way to conviction. This wasn't about one seat. This was about the sky itself, who was allowed to sit where, and what that said about who mattered. One evening, as Elias prepared to leave his office, Andre called with urgency in his voice. "Big news. Donovan is calling an emergency board meeting. He knows something's coming. He's trying to shore up his power." Sophia's voice joined on the line. "That means we're getting to them. We need to be ready. Elias, when the time comes, it won't be enough to demand reform. We'll have to show them you can lead better than they can." Elias stood in the quiet of his office, staring again at the skyline. The coalition was forming, the pressure building. He could feel the storm gathering. For the first time since that humiliating night on the plane, he felt not just anger, but purpose. He whispered to himself, steady and sure, "If they think I'll back down, they don't know me at all." The morning air in San Francisco felt sharp, tinged with the kind of energy that precedes a storm. Elias Carter sat at his desk, coffee cooling beside untouched files. His phone buzzed endlessly, vibrating with messages from colleagues, journalists, and allies. Something had shifted overnight. Andre Miller burst into the office before Elias could even glance at the notifications. His grin was electric. "It's happening. The video's gone viral again. This time it isn't just about you. People are uploading their own stories. Hashtags are spreading across 3 platforms at once. Orion is trending for all the wrong reasons." Sophia Reed entered moments later, tablet in hand. Her expression was calm, but her eyes gleamed with urgency. "It's worse for them than we thought." Naomi's recorded interview leaked. Not the full version, but a clip. She's describing how Victoria Langford berated her, word for word, the line about you people. It's everywhere. Elias felt the familiar weight tighten in his chest. The words replayed in his mind like a scar he had never chosen to carry. He set his coffee aside and folded his hands. "How bad is the fallout?" Sophia swiped her screen, showing charts of plummeting sentiment. Orion's stock dropped another 8% in pre-market trading. News anchors are quoting Naomi directly. Advocacy groups are calling for boycotts. The Department of Transportation just announced a review of discrimination complaints against the airline. This is the storm. Andre slapped the table. "This is our chance. Elias, Donovan, and the Langfords are cornered. We push now, before they regroup." Elias leaned back, the noise of their urgency swirling around him. He closed his eyes briefly. Images flooded him, his grandmother sitting on their small porch in Chicago, reminding him that true strength wasn't about the battles you picked, but about the ones you finished. He opened his eyes with calm clarity. "We won't rush. Momentum is on our side, but if we move recklessly, we risk everything. We'll strike at the right time." Across the city, inside Orion Airways headquarters, panic pulsed through the top floors. Charles Donovan paced the length of the executive boardroom, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, I understand, but we can't allow this to spiral any further. Stabilize the market, issue a statement. Say we take these allegations seriously. Stress our diversity initiatives, buy time." Edward Langford sat rigidly at the table, his jaw tight, while Victoria fumed beside him. She had her sunglasses on indoors, as though hiding from the glare of her own reputation. That girl Naomi is a liar. She snapped. I was under stress. She misinterpreted. And Elias Carter is exploiting this for his own agenda. Donovan ended his call and faced them both. His voice was sharp. It doesn't matter what you think. Public opinion is turning this into a trial. Every time you deny, the footage proves you wrong. If we don't act decisively, shareholders will revolt. Edward's voice was low but venomous. You're supposed to manage crises. Donovan, that's why you're paid millions. Instead, you let a single man hijack the narrative of this company. Donovan shot back. That single man now controls nearly 15% of our shares. If he aligns with the coalition I suspect he's building, he'll be unstoppable. We need to find leverage before he consolidates. Victoria crossed her arms. Discredit Naomi. Find skeletons in her past. And as for Elias Carter, remind the world he's no saint either. He's ruthless in business. Paint him as a hypocrite. Back at Nova Link. Elias's team prepared for the next move. Andre scrolled through social media feeds, his excitement bubbling over. Look at this. Elias. College students are marching at airports. Flight attendants from other airlines are voicing support. This isn't just about Orion anymore. It's about the entire industry. Naomi walked into the room quietly. She looked exhausted. Her uniform folded neatly in her bag, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. Yet she carried herself with a kind of quiet dignity. I didn't want the video to leak, she admitted. I wasn't ready. But now that it's out, I won't hide. If I lose my job, so be it. I can live with that. What I can't live with is silence. Elias studied her face, seeing both her fear and her resolve. Naomi, you've already done more than most people would dare. The fact that you're standing here is proof of your strength. They'll come after you, but you won't stand alone. Not anymore. Sophia placed a reassuring hand on Naomi's shoulder. We'll protect you. Legally. Publicly. Whatever it takes. Your testimony is the backbone of this case. They know it, which is why they're desperate. That evening, Elias returned home to silence. His apartment, usually a refuge, felt heavy with the weight of expectation. He sat at the piano in the corner, fingers brushing the keys but producing no sound. Music had always been his escape, but tonight it mocked him. His thoughts swirled too violently to find melody. He whispered into the stillness. Is this really about justice, or am I letting pride lead me? The memory of Victoria Langford's dismissive tone echoed back at him, layered with countless smaller humiliations from his past. Being mistaken for an assistant in meetings, being second-guessed despite his credentials, being asked if he truly belonged. The injustice was bigger than one woman's cruelty. It was systemic, deep, poisonous. He stood abruptly, staring at his reflection in the window. No, he said aloud, this isn't pride, this is purpose. The following morning, headlines screamed across the country. Orion in crisis, whistleblower speaks, CEO silent. Naomi's full interview was scheduled to air on a major news network that night. Donovan and the Langfords knew the damage would multiply. Inside their penthouse suite, Edward slammed a newspaper down. If we don't stop this interview, Orion is finished. That girl will bring the whole company down. Victoria's lips curved in disdain. We'll sue the network, intimidate them. Money still talks, but Donovan knew better. The world has changed. Money won't silence this. The more you fight, the louder it gets. If we're going to survive, we need sacrifice. Someone has to fall on their sword. Edward stared at him. "And who do you propose?" My wife Donovan didn't answer. Meanwhile, Elias and his team gathered in Nova Link's war room, screens lit up with live coverage, tweets, and financial updates. The tension was electric, every second pulling them closer to the breaking point. Sophia's phone buzzed. She read quickly, her face tightening. "Donovan is calling an emergency press conference this afternoon. He'll try to preempt the interview, spin the narrative before Naomi speaks." Andre clenched his fist. Let him. Every word he says will only dig them deeper. People aren't buying corporate excuses anymore. Elias sat quietly, absorbing it all. The storm had broken. The air was charged, unstoppable. He felt the fear of what was to come, but beneath it, a current of certainty carried him forward. He looked at his team, his allies, his coalition. This is no longer just about us. It's about everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. We don't flinch now. We hold steady. And when the world hears Naomi tonight, they'll know the truth, and the truth will change everything. The press conference began at noon, sharp. Cameras filled the Orion Airways headquarters auditorium. Lenses trained on the sleek podium where Charles Donovan stood, flanked by Orion's logo and an American flag. His tie was crisp, his expression polished, but a bead of sweat betrayed the storm inside him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady but rehearsed. "Recent allegations against Orion Airways have painted a misleading picture of our company. Let me be clear. We take all claims of discrimination seriously. But what happened on Flight 2278 has been exaggerated, distorted, and taken out of context." The reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashing. Donovan continued. "Our employees are trained to prioritize safety and comfort. Sometimes misunderstandings occur. But Orion Airways has always stood for fairness, diversity, and respect. We will not allow a single incident to undermine decades of service." He paused, glancing at his notes. "We are launching an internal review, and we have invited independent auditors to confirm our commitment to equity. We ask the public for patience while the facts are examined fully." From the audience, a reporter raised her hand. "Mr. Donovan, video footage clearly shows Mrs. Langford taking Mr. Carter's assigned seat. The flight crew pressured him to move. And there are multiple witnesses. How do you reconcile that with your statement?" Donovan's jaw tightened. "The footage lacks context. Our crew acted in good faith to de-escalate tension. Sometimes decisions must be made quickly in the air to preserve order." Another reporter called out, "What about the passenger, Naomi Brooks? She says she was there, that she heard Mrs. Langford say, 'You people.' She described being berated herself." Donovan's smile froze. "I cannot comment on unverified statements. Employees are often under stress. Miscommunication can occur. Let us not condemn a company based on anecdotes." The press murmured with dissatisfaction. Donovan wrapped up quickly, repeating Orion's commitment to fairness. As he left the stage, his words hung hollow, like smoke dissolving in wind. Across town, Elias Carter watched the broadcast from Nova Link's conference room, his arms crossed. Andre paced behind him, muttering, "He's dodging, deflecting, gaslighting. This will backfire. People can smell dishonesty." Sophia nodded. He just undermined himself. By dismissing Naomi, he handed her credibility. When the interview airs tonight, the contrast will be undeniable. Elias said nothing. He felt the familiar churn in his chest. Donovan's words had been carefully chosen. But beneath them, Elias heard the same old song, deny, minimize, deflect. It was the language of institutions that had silenced people like him for generations. At 8 o'clock that evening, Naomi Brooks sat in a studio chair across from a respected anchor. The camera lights glowed hot, but she held her chin high. Her voice, though soft, carried weight. "I was the flight attendant on Flight 1278, she began. "I saw what happened with my own eyes. Mr. Carter asked politely for his seat back. Mrs. Langford refused. When he pressed, she said the words that have haunted me since you people. I knew exactly what she meant. We all did." The anchor leaned in. And how did the crew respond? Naomi's eyes flickered with pain. "We were told to de-escalate," which really meant we were told to protect her comfort. The captain asked Mr. Carter to move. He did, with dignity, but it was wrong. It wasn't the first time either. Orion prioritizes certain passengers based on wealth and influence. Employees know it. We're told not to speak about it. The interview cut to clips of Naomi describing years of complaints buried, colleagues silenced, policies ignored. Tears welled in her eyes as she spoke. "I risk my career saying this, but silence protects the powerful, and I can't be complicit anymore." By the time the interview ended, social media exploded. Hashtags surged again, louder than before. Naomi's courage became the rallying cry. Videos of passengers recounting their own experiences flooded timelines. Orion's phone lines jammed with calls. In his apartment, Elias sat alone watching the aftermath unfold on screen. He felt pride swell in his chest, not for himself, but for Naomi. She had risked everything to speak truth. He whispered, "You are the change, Naomi." But beneath the pride, his thoughts turned darker. He knew the retaliation that awaited her. He knew the machine that Donovan and the Langfords would unleash. For the first time, Elias wondered if he had placed too much burden on her shoulders. His phone buzzed. A message from Naomi. "Thank you for standing firm. You gave me the courage to find my voice." Elias closed his eyes, letting the words settle. She wasn't blaming him. She was choosing this path with her own strength. That realization steadied him. Meanwhile, inside Orion's penthouse suite, fury erupted. Edward Langford slammed his fist on the table. "She's a traitor, a nobody. We'll bury her in lawsuits until she begs for mercy." Victoria paced, her voice sharp with venom. "And Carter, this is his orchestration. He's manipulating her for his vendetta. We need to end this now." Donovan, however, was quieter than usual. He knew the tide had turned. The board was restless. Investors were furious. He could feel his grip slipping, but still he clung to calculation. "We need a scapegoat," he said coldly, "someone to sacrifice publicly. If it spares the company, then so be it." The Langfords glared at him, but he didn't flinch. Back at Nova Link, Sophia was already strategizing. "Tomorrow, we launch our next step. Public petition, coalition press statement, calls for congressional hearings. We're past debate. It's time to force the system to listen." Andre leaned over the table, his energy crackling. "Elias, this is bigger than you now. The whole country is watching. You could lead a movement that changes aviation forever." Elias looked at them, his allies, his friends, the weight of their words pressing down. He felt the burden of expectation, the fear of failure, but also the fire of possibility. His grandmother's voice returned to him, stern but loving. Dignity is not given, it's claimed. He rose from his chair, his voice calm but fierce. Then let's claim it. For Naomi, for every passenger silenced, for every worker told to smile through abuse. We're not asking anymore, we're demanding. Outside, the city pulsed with energy. Protesters gathered at airports, chanting for reform. Taxi drivers honked in support. Families held signs that read, "Fair skies for all." The storm had become a movement. And in that moment, Elias knew there was no turning back. The Orion Airways boardroom was designed to impress. A long, marble table stretched beneath crystal chandeliers. The walls lined with framed photographs of aircraft from decades past. It was a shrine to legacy and power. Yet on this morning, the grandeur felt like a stage for betrayal. Charles Donovan stood at the head of the table, his notes arranged neatly, his posture rigid. Around him, 12 board members shifted uncomfortably, their expressions ranging from anger to exhaustion. Edward Langford sat with arms crossed, jaw clenched, while Victoria tapped manicured nails against the polished surface. Donovan began with his usual composure. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are facing a public relations crisis, not an operational one. The fundamentals of our business remain strong. With careful messaging, we can stabilize investor confidence and move past this distraction." A board member with silver hair leaned forward. "Distraction. Charles, our stock has lost 20% in 2 weeks. The Department of Transportation is breathing down our necks. We are being roasted on every news channel. This is not a distraction. This is existential." Another added sharply, "And your press conference only made things worse. You dismissed a whistleblower whose credibility is now beyond dispute. Naomi Brooks is being hailed as a hero, while Orion looks like the villain." Donovan's smile was tight. Naomi Brooks is a disgruntled employee. She misinterpreted events. We cannot allow anecdotal accounts to dictate corporate policy. Victoria cut in, her voice dripping with disdain. Finally, some sense. This is a smear campaign orchestrated by Elias Carter. Everyone knows he wants influence. He is weaponizing my words to weaken Orion. The silver-haired director turned on her. "Mrs. Langford, your words are at the center of this crisis. Your refusal to acknowledge that is endangering this company." Victoria's eyes flared. "I will not apologize for being misunderstood." Edward pounded the table. "Enough. We are wasting time. Donovan is right. We circle the wagons, ride this out, and punish those responsible for leaks. Carter will overplay his hand. He always does." But murmurs rippled around the table. Some directors nodded in agreement, but others shifted uneasily. A younger member spoke up. With respect, "Mr. Langford, public perception has changed. We can no longer dismiss these issues as noise. The petition circulating online already has 500,000 signatures demanding accountability. This is not going away." Donovan raised his voice slightly, authority lacing every syllable. "Then we offer reforms, cosmetic changes, sensitivity training, public apologies, enough to calm the storm without altering our operations. That is the pragmatic path." For a moment, silence lingered. Then one director, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice, spoke with finality. "Cosmetic changes will not save us. We need structural reform, or Orion will collapse. And frankly, Charles, I'm not confident you are the leader who can deliver that." Gasps rippled around the table. Donovan's face froze. his practiced calm cracking. Edward leapt to his defense. This is absurd. Charles has run this airline profitably for a decade. We will not throw him under the bus because of one incident. But the tide had turned. Several heads nodded in agreement with the dissenting voice. Another director said quietly, "The incident is not the problem. It is the symptom. The problem is a culture we have all ignored, and now it is destroying us." Donovan gripped the table. "Are you suggesting we let Elias Carter dictate the future of Orion?" The silver-haired director replied, "Perhaps we should listen to him. He has more of the public's trust right now than any of us in this room." Victoria rose from her chair, fury radiating. "You would hand over our company to that man over my dead body." The meeting dissolved into chaos, voices overlapping, alliances fracturing. Donovan fought to hold control, but for the first time, the board no longer looked like his. Meanwhile, at Novalink headquarters, Elias sat with Sophia and Andre in a smaller, humbler room, surrounded by laptops and coffee cups. The contrast with Orion's marble halls was striking. Yet here, there was clarity and purpose. Andre slapped a report down on the table. "You've got 3 more major shareholders ready to join. Combined with your stake, we'll control nearly 25% of Orion's voting power. That's enough to demand a board vote on leadership," Sophia added. "And the DOT inquiry means they are already under regulatory pressure. If we align reform with shareholder interests, they will have no choice but to listen." Elias nodded, absorbing the weight of what they were building. His voice was quiet but firm. "This isn't just about removing Donovan or silencing the Langfords. If we step in, we must offer something greater. Not just change of faces, but change of system." He spread documents across the table. Draft proposals for mandatory anti-bias training, transparent complaint procedures, independent oversight committees, a blueprint for reform he had been shaping in quiet hours of doubt. Naomi entered the room timidly, her face pale but determined. "I just came from another interview. They asked if I believed this movement could change the industry. I told them yes. I told them this wasn't about punishing a few bad actors. It's about building skies where everyone feels safe." Her words filled the room with a hush. Elias looked at her, then at Sophia and Andre. For the first time, he saw not just a coalition, but a team bound by shared conviction. He exhaled slowly. "Then we stop thinking small. We're not here to shame Orion. We're here to reshape aviation. And we will." That night. Elias stood on his balcony overlooking the city. The lights stretched endlessly, each one a story, a life. He thought of the passengers writing him letters, the strangers chanting at airports, the crew members whispering their gratitude. He also thought of the threats, the smear campaigns, the retaliation waiting around every corner. His chest ached with the weight of it all, yet beneath the heaviness, he felt something steady, like bedrock beneath shifting sands. Purpose. He whispered into the night, "This isn't just my fight anymore. It belongs to all of us, at the same hour, in the Langford penthouse." Edward poured himself another drink while Victoria scrolled furiously through social media. Her face twisted in rage. "They're turning on us. Edward, even the board is wavering. Do something." Edward's voice was cold steel. "Then we take off the gloves. Carter wants war. He'll get one. Tomorrow, we launch everything we have. We'll break him before he breaks us." The storm was no longer looming. It was here, raging through boardrooms and living rooms, airports and screens. The question was no longer whether change was coming. It was who would survive when it arrived. The morning began with silence. Elias Carter woke to the low hum of his apartment. The city outside still half asleep. He brewed coffee and tried to center himself, but a knock at the door disrupted the fragile calm. When he opened it, Sophia Reed stood there, her expression tight, phone in hand. "You need to see this," she said, stepping inside. On her screen was a breaking news headline. "Elias Carter under fire, leaked documents question his business ethics." The article claimed Novalink had engaged in questionable contracts abroad, citing unnamed sources and vague figures. It was a calculated attack, timed perfectly. Elias read silently, his jaw tightening. He knew these claims were distortions, half-truths at best, but to the public, they looked damning. Andre Miller called moments later, his voice sharp with anger. "This is the Langfords. They've weaponized PR firms and bought journalists. They're trying to paint you as corrupt, to discredit the movement. We knew they'd retaliate, but this is nuclear." Sophia crossed her arms. "They want to make you toxic. If the public doubts your integrity, the reforms collapse. This isn't about truth anymore, it's about perception." Elias sat heavily on the couch, staring at the article. He felt the weight pressing on him again, heavier than before. Doubt crept in like a shadow. Could he withstand this? Could the movement survive with him as its face? That evening, the smear-dominated television panels, commentators debated his character, dissecting contracts, replaying the same lines. Supporters defended him, but the attacks sowed seeds of uncertainty. Elias stepped onto his balcony, the city lights blurred by fatigue. He whispered into the night, "Is this the price of standing tall, to be dragged through the mud until nothing remains?" His phone buzzed. A message from Naomi Brooks. "Do not let them twist you. I know who you are. So does everyone who matters. Truth shines through lies." Her words steadied him. He realized this fight was no longer his alone. Every voice rising behind him was part of the shield. The following morning, Sophia convened a press conference of their own. The small hall was packed with journalists, cameras flashing. Elias stood at the podium, the weight of eyes heavy but not crushing. "I have seen the headlines," he began, his voice calm. "I will not dignify falsehoods with lengthy rebuttals. Let me say simply, integrity has guided every step of my career, and it guides me now. This is not about me. It is about passengers humiliated, employees silenced, and a culture that has ignored dignity for too long. If they attack me, it is because they fear the change we demand, but no smear will stop this movement." Applause broke from the audience, not orchestrated but genuine. Elias paused, then unveiled the reform blueprint. "Today, I call for the Sky Equality Initiative. It includes mandatory anti-bias training for all crew, transparent complaint tracking accessible to the public, independent oversight, and penalties for airlines that fail to uphold fairness. This is how we ensure skies belong to everyone." Reporters leaned forward, typing furiously. The message was clear. Elias was not backing down. He was raising the stakes. Andre stepped up afterward, his tone fiery. "We are delivering this proposal to Congress and the Department of Transportation, and to Orion Airways Board. Hear me clearly if you resist. You will not just lose public trust. You will lose your company." The press conference reverberated across the nation. Advocacy groups hailed the initiative. passengers flooded social media with support. Even skeptical commentators admitted the blueprint was bold, specific, and impossible to dismiss. In Orion's boardroom, the reaction was panic. Edward Langford hurled the newspaper against the wall. He's not backing down. He's mobilizing Congress. If this catches fire, every airline will be forced to comply. Victoria's face was taut with fury. Then we ruin him completely. The smear wasn't enough. We dig deeper, find anyone who will say he's ruthless, anyone who owes us favors, and if that fails, we destroy his allies. Charles Donovan rubbed his temples, exhausted. You're turning this into open war. Carter is gaining legitimacy. The more you attack, the stronger he looks. The board is already shifting. Edward sneered. Then you'd better hold them together, Donovan, or you'll be the next casualty. That night, Naomi received a threatening voicemail. A distorted voice warned her to retract her statements or face consequences. Shaken, she called Elias. "They're coming after me now," she whispered, "but I won't give in." Elias listened, rage simmering beneath his calm. "Naomi, you're not alone. They want to scare us because they know we're winning, but fear is their weapon, not ours." He hung up and sat in silence, wrestling with the fire inside him. Part of him longed to hit back with equal ruthlessness, to tear the Langfords apart. But another voice whispered that dignity was his strongest weapon. If he became like them, the movement would lose its soul. The following week, rallies erupted outside major airports. Protesters held signs with slogans born from Naomi's testimony. Fair skies for all. Dignity cannot fly, stand by. We stand with Elias, watching footage of the marches. Elias felt the swell of something larger than himself. He understood now. The Langfords could smear him, attack him, threaten him. But the truth was no longer confined to one man. It lived in thousands of voices, millions of hearts, in his office. Elias turned to Sophia and Andre. "They think they can destroy me, but they cannot destroy an idea whose time has come." Andre grinned. "Then let's take this all the way." Sophia added softly, "Prepare yourself. They will strike again, and harder. But if we stand firm, this storm could become history." Elias looked at them both, his resolve like steel. "Then let history remember that we did not bow." Outside, the city pulsed with chants and songs. The movement had grown beyond a scandal, beyond an airline. It was now a question, written across the sky itself: who deserves dignity, and who will defend it? And Elias knew, no matter the cost, he had chosen his answer. The Capitol building rose in front of Elias Carter like a fortress of history. Its marble steps gleamed under the afternoon sun. Crowds gathered on the lawn holding banners that read "Justice in the skies" and "We fly together." The chants carried through the crisp air as Elias walked inside, flanked by Sophia Reed and Andre Miller. Congressional hearings were nothing new for Elias. He had testified before committees about technology and ethics, but this felt different. This was not about algorithms or profits. This was about human dignity. Inside the chamber, cameras lined the walls, reporters whispered, pens ready. Across the long dais, lawmakers shuffled their papers. The chairwoman struck her gavel. This hearing will come to order. Today, we address systemic discrimination in the airline industry, sparked by recent events aboard Orion Airways Flight 2278. Mr. Carter, thank you for joining us. Elias adjusted his tie and leaned into the microphone. His voice carried calm authority. Thank you. Madam Chair, I did not ask for this fight, but when injustice presents itself, silence is complicity. What happened to me was not unique. It was a symptom of deeper practices that have long gone unchallenged. We cannot accept skies divided by privilege, where some are protected and others are humiliated. That is why I propose the Sky Equality Initiative. He outlined the blueprint mandatory anti-bias training, independent oversight boards, transparent complaint systems, and penalties for noncompliance. The chamber buzzed with attention. Even skeptics listened closely. One congressman leaned forward. Mr. Carter, your critics argue you're using this incident for personal gain. How do you respond? Elias's eyes did not waver. Personal gain would have been silence. Accepting a payout, a statement, a quiet settlement. Instead, I chose exposure, accountability, and reform. That is not gain, that is risk. And I accept it because change demands sacrifice. Applause rippled through the chamber, though the gavel quickly restored order. Watching on live television, Naomi Brooks sat in her modest apartment. Tears streaming down her cheeks, she whispered to herself, "He's fighting for all of us." Across town, inside Orion Airways boardroom, the mood was frantic. Edward Langford paced like a caged lion, barking orders into his phone. Pull every favor we have in Congress. Kill this initiative before it takes root. Victoria sat rigid, her fury barely contained. He's humiliating us on national television. Edward, do something now. Charles Donovan rubbed his temples, exhausted from weeks of crisis. We are out of time. The board is restless. Investors are abandoning ship. If we do not offer real reform, they will side with Carter and force leadership change. Edward spun on him, eyes blazing. You coward. You'd think we surrendered to him? Never. We double down. We leak more dirt, real or fabricated. Destroy his credibility before Congress votes. But one board member spoke quietly, almost trembling. Mr. Langford, with respect, this is no longer about Carter. This is about Orion's survival. And your presence, yours and your wife's, is becoming a liability. Victoria's face went pale with outrage. How dare you? The fracture in Orion's leadership had become visible, and no amount of authority could glue it back together. That evening, Elias returned to his apartment drained. The hearings had taken every ounce of his composure. He loosened his tie and sat in the dark, the city buzzing beyond his window. Doubt crept in like an unwelcome guest. Was he pushing too far? Could one initiative truly shift an industry built on decades of silent inequities? He closed his eyes, hearing again his grandmother's voice. You will be tested. Not when things are easy, but when everything is stacked against you. That is when your strength must be greatest. His phone buzzed. A message from Naomi. We believe in you. Don't stop now. Another from Andre Momentum is ours. They're cracking. And one from Sophia. Get some rest. Tomorrow we move again. Elias smiled faintly. They were his anchors. He would not falter. The next morning, the front page carried a shocking headline. Orion shareholders call for emergency vote on leadership. Anonymous leaks confirmed that nearly a third of the board supported replacing Donovan and curbing the Langfords' influence. Andre stormed into the office, unable to contain his excitement. It's happening. Elias, the shareholders are aligning with us. If we push, we can control the vote. Donovan is finished. Edward and Victoria are on the edge, Sophia cautioned. Do not underestimate them. Cornered animals strike hardest. They will lash out with everything they have. She was right. That very afternoon, a new smear erupted. Tabloids screamed about Elias's personal life, distorting friendships into scandals, inventing affairs, twisting harmless details into ugly narratives. It was raw, desperate, and vicious. Elias stared at the headlines, weariness heavy in his bones. He had always guarded his private life carefully. Now it was being weaponized against him. He wanted to slam his fist, to roar against the injustice, but instead he sat quietly, hands folded, breathing deeply. Sophia watched him carefully. They are trying to break you, Elias, but every lie they tell reveals their fear. Hold steady. That evening, a rally filled the plaza outside Nova Link. Thousands gathered, holding candles that glowed like stars in the night. Naomi stood on stage, voice trembling but strong. I was afraid to speak, but Elias showed me that dignity is worth the risk. Tonight, we stand together to demand skies that honor every passenger and every worker. When Elias stepped onto the stage, the crowd roared. He felt the energy wash over him, renewing his spirit. He spoke with quiet conviction. They can smear me, attack me, even threaten me, but they cannot silence the truth. And the truth is, this dignity does not belong to the privileged few. It belongs to every human being, and together we will claim it. The cheers shook the plaza, echoing into the night sky. Back in their penthouse, Edward Langford watched the broadcast with clenched fists. If the board turns tomorrow, we lose everything. Victoria's voice was sharp as glass. Then, tomorrow, we draw blood. The boiling point had been reached. The next day would decide not just leadership of an airline, but the direction of an entire industry. The boardroom of Orion Airways was filled with a tension so heavy it seemed to pull the air from the room. Outside, reporters clustered along the sidewalks. Inside, shareholders sat stiffly, eyes darting between thick folders of documents and the clock on the wall. It was the day of reckoning. Elias Carter entered quietly, not with fanfare, but with a quiet dignity that seemed to command more respect than any display of arrogance could. He carried only a slim folder under his arm. Behind him walked Sophia Reed and Andre Miller, their presence steady and reassuring. Across the long mahogany table sat Edward Langford, jaw tight, eyes sharp with rage. Victoria Langford sat beside him, her posture rigid, lips pressed thin as if holding back venom. Charles Donovan, worn and pale, tapped his pen nervously against the table. The chairman cleared his throat. This emergency session has been called to address the growing crisis facing Orion Airways. Shareholder confidence has eroded. Bookings have plummeted. Market value has fallen by 32% in less than a month. We must vote today on proposals concerning leadership and reform. Edward leaned forward, voice booming. This is absurd. We are letting one man's vendetta dismantle decades of success. Carter is a tech mogul, not an aviation expert. He exploited an isolated incident for personal gain. Elias stood, his calm presence cutting through Edward's thunder. This is not about me. It is about every employee silenced, every passenger humiliated, every worker dismissed. The incident aboard Flight 2278 was not isolated. It was a mirror reflecting a system that rewards privilege and excuses abuse. He opened his folder and laid out photos, testimonies, financial records. These are voices you ignored. These are warnings you buried. These are employees who gave their loyalty, only to be discarded when their dignity was trampled. This board has a choice: cling to denial or embrace change. Victoria snapped, her voice sharp. Enough of this theater. Elias Carter is nothing but a disruptor. People like him. She stopped herself too late, the words dripping with the contempt that had ignited the entire storm. The room froze. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Elias did not flinch. He simply turned to the others. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly the culture I speak of. Sophia rose beside him. The proposals before you are clear and independent ethics committee with enforcement power. Mandatory anti-bias and accountability training across all levels. Transparent complaint systems with federal oversight, and leadership changes where conflicts of interest have corrupted judgment. You can either pass these measures or face continued collapse in market trust, Andre added. Shareholders representing 36% of Orion stock have already pledged support for reform. Combine that with my holdings and Mr. Carter's, and we represent a controlling bloc. You can vote with us today, or be swept aside tomorrow. The chairman swallowed, glancing nervously around the room. Edward slammed his fist against the table. You think you can strip me of what I built? You think shareholders will betray me for him? Sandra Chen, a board member long silent, spoke with quiet steel. This isn't betrayal. Edward, it's survival. Carter is right. We ignored too much for too long. One by one, heads nodded. The tide had turned. Edward's face darkened, veins visible at his temple. If you do this, you'll regret it. I will ruin you all. Carter, especially you. You think this industry will follow your idealism. It will chew you up and spit you out. Elias's voice was low but unyielding. No. Edward, it is the old way that is finished. The arrogance, the entitlement, the disdain. It has no seat left at this table. The chairman lifted his gavel. We moved to a vote. The proposals were read aloud, each word echoing like the strike of a drum. Hands were raised. The count was tallied. The outcome was undeniable. All three reform measures passed with a decisive majority. Edward lunged to his feet, but before he could speak, the chairman continued. Furthermore, in light of misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty, this board votes to remove Edward Langford from his position effective immediately. Gasps filled the room. Victoria's hand shot out to grip Edward's arm, her face stricken. You can't do this. He built this company. Sandra's voice was calm but firm. No, Mrs. Langford. He corrupted it. That era ends today. Edward's fury boiled over. You will regret this. Carter, he roared, pointing a trembling finger. This is not justice. This is war. Elias simply gathered his papers, meeting Edward's glare with steady eyes. No, Edward. This is accountability. Security entered quietly, escorting Edward and Victoria from the room as cameras outside captured the image that would dominate headlines, the once untouchable power couple leaving in disgrace. The room exhaled. For the first time in weeks, silence did not feel suffocating. It felt cleansing. The chairman turned to Elias. Mr. Carter, you now represent the largest voice among Orion shareholders. The floor is yours. Elias paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. I did not come here to seize power. I came here to correct a course. Orion will not be rebuilt on fear or favoritism. It will be rebuilt on dignity, on fairness, on respect. Today is not an ending. It is the beginning of a new flight path. Applause broke out, tentative at first, then growing stronger. Later that evening, Elias stood on the steps outside Orion headquarters as a crowd of reporters surged forward. Cameras flashed, questions shouted. He raised a hand for silence. 6 weeks ago, I boarded a plane to work quietly in seat 3A. That seat was taken from me. Today, we returned it not just to me, but to everyone who has ever been told they did not belong. This fight was never about a seat. It was about the sky itself. From this day forward, Orion Airways will represent skies open to all, not just the privileged few, and we will ensure that no passenger, no employee is stripped of dignity again. The cheers of the crowd rolled like thunder. In the front row stood Naomi Brooks, tears glistening as she clapped. Nearby, Captain Richard Hale bowed his head in respect. Sophia stood tall, relief softening her features. Andre grinned, the weight of weeks of battle finally easing. And somewhere in the shadows of the crowd, ordinary travelers looked up at the night sky, feeling a shift they could not quite name but would never forget. The following weeks brought sweeping transformation. Training programs launched. The Ethics Committee began work. Employees felt empowered to speak. Passenger trust slowly returned. The media called it the Orion shift. And through it all, Elias remained steady, not seeking glory, but ensuring the system endured. He knew the work was never finished, but he also knew what began with humiliation at 30,000 feet had become a movement that no storm could ground. As he looked out one evening from his office window, the lights of Orion planes dotted the sky. Each one carried more than passengers. Each carried a promise. He whispered to himself, "Never again." And with that, Elias Carter closed his folder, ready for the work ahead. Elias Carter's journey reminds us that discrimination does not end with one confrontation, and justice is not handed out like a gift. It is fought for, earned, and built into systems so others will never face the same humiliation. What began with one stolen seat became a ripple that shook an entire industry and forced it to confront truths it had ignored for far too long. But this story is not only about corporate reform or shareholder victories. It's about dignity, about the courage to remain calm when the world tries to strip you of respect, about refusing to let hatred define you, and instead choosing to transform it into a force for good. We all saw Victoria and Edward Langford fall from their pedestal. But more importantly, we saw Naomi Brooks rise, we saw Captain Hale learn, we saw an airline transform, and we saw Elias prove that sometimes the quietest response carries the loudest echo. So, the question now is this: what would you do if you were in Elias's position? Would you have had the strength to stay calm, the vision to think bigger, or the determination to rewrite the rules for everyone? If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Share it. Talk about it. Carry its message into your own life. And if you want to hear more powerful stories of resilience, dignity, and justice, make sure to like this video. Share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to our channel. The next story might just change the way you see the world.